I was yelling at Mom when she blew out. She was in complete control of the debate 1 minute, giving me the mother of all glares across the dining room table, and the next she was oozing off my face like congealed spaghetti sauce. Even with her coloring my cheeks, her voice remained alive in my ears. My lashes were dripping with tears. In my mouth, I could taste her. "You're a child." Mom's voice echoed in my head. "I'm old enough to drive a car," I'd stated matter-of-factly, brandishing my spoon in defiance. I reached for my favorite cereal, but she swatted my hand away, replacing it with a bowl of plain oats. I was cursed with an almond mother. As a result, the only treats I saw were raisins rather than chocolate chips. In the Sinclair household, breakfast was always the source of all problems. Mom was not an early riser. My younger brother and sister left for school early. I couldn't figure out why. With your father supervising, Mom tightened her grasp on her coffee. I could tell she was about to blow, but I was determined to persuade her otherwise. Her reasoning was that she didn't want me to be hurt, but I knew it was more complicated than that. Mom was determined to wreck my life. She was an expert at it, already prohibiting me from leaving town and imposing a curfew. I said no, and I mean no. Mom sighed. "You're inexperienced. I'll think about it when you're 18. End of conversation. She prodded the table impatiently. "Eat your breakfast, please." "But that's not fair." My blood was boiling. "Why am I the one being punished?" She gave me a warning glance. "You're not being punished." "I clearly am," I shot back. "I don't see this same energy with Nathaniel." Mom let out a sigh. "Your brother is 1 year older. He is old enough to drive a car. I am finished discussing this matter with you. If you disagree, you're free to move out and make up your own rules." I smacked my spoon against the table. "But..." Mom took a drink of her coffee. End of conversation. "You're not even being fair." Mom's pupils constricted. "End," she said emphatically, "of con." I didn't want to hear that at all. She was extremely obstinate, even sillier than me, and I was meant to be the child. Instead of listening to her, I screamed in rage, my own words wavering on my lips, halting, when something warm splashed in my face, followed by a high-pitched ringing in my ears. The shock of it washed over me, rich copper filling my lips and splattering over my eyes. At first, I felt she'd gone too far and tossed her coffee in my face. But it wasn't like coffee was this thick and coppery, clinging to my lashes and distorting my eyesight. It sounded like a nuclear bomb had exploded directly in front of me. A dazzling light steadily expanding, darkness speckling over my eyes, and then nothing. Mom was present, scowling disapprovingly at me, and suddenly she wasn't. Morning sunshine streaming through the blinds sculpted her face, her loose ponytail flowing down her back, and her bright pink bathrobe. I slowly blinked, the ringing sound becoming louder and more powerful. It seemed like a single coin was rattling around in my cranium. The sun was still shining, but it was obscured by strands of sparkling light peering through the strong smear of scarlet that covered my eyes. She was everywhere, yet she was also in front of me, her torso swinging back and forth like a lousy fucking cartoon. I could feel a whimper fighting its way up my throat as my eyes blinked red. Various colors of red painted the walls and dripped off the countertop in our kitchen. The penny in my skull stopped rattling, my ears popped, and the world came to a halt around me. Something wet and fleshy fell from the ceiling, and the scream that had been wrangled in my throat, struggling for a release, broke out in a racking sob. Mom felt like congealed spaghetti sauce on my face. Bits of her cranium stuck to my pajamas. I stepped back, slipping in the flowing red puddle gliding over our kitchen tiles, until her torso smacked against the ground, a horrible cavern where her head used to be. I recalled how to move. I was out of the kitchen in one stride, panting for air, my hands on my knees. I was standing on our porch in 2 strides, staring dazedly at a crashed car in the middle of the road. Several of them were strewn across the block. This one was familiar to me. The Honda Civic of Mrs. Petra. I could see the scarlet streaming from the windows despite the fact that the automobile had flipped onto its side. There was a person inside, a young girl of about 5 or 6 years old. Her mouth was large and O-shaped, with streaks of scarlet running down her face and dark ringlets of hair clinging to her pale skin. Her daughter, Emily. I didn't notice her cries until my ears exploded once more. But it wasn't just Emily this time. Screams could be heard all across my neighborhood. Our town had come to a halt, with blaring automobile alarms adding to the cacophony of shouts encircling us. I pulled Emily from the smoking wreckage of the automobile and hugged her to my breast, covering her eyes. Mrs. Petra's body was slumped in her seatbelt. My mother and Mrs. Petra weren't the only ones. After I brought Emily home, the ramifications of witnessing my mother being blown to pieces in front of me began to manifest. I scratched at the skin on my arm, but she wouldn't come off. She was stuck to my lashes and caked into my hair. I spat many times before my stomach lurched, ejecting undigested cereal. I checked every house in a daze. Each of them depicted a similar setting: a bloody red explosion and children without parents. I joined the gathering crowd of students looking for an answer to what was going on once the ringing in my ears decreased and I felt more in control of myself. I remembered my siblings when a youngster on a skateboard told me there was a wreck at the end of the road. I made my way to school, feeling ill to my stomach. They were sitting on the pavement, bewildered, among a bunch of kids. When I tried to hug them, they didn't respond. Sarah's eyes were empty, unseen caverns peering into nothingness. Nathaniel refused to look me in the eyes, clutching me a bit too tightly, burrowing his head against my still-stained shoulder. He was a shell of his old self, the brother I had mocked hours before, because he wouldn't let me drive his car. Sarah wanted to take the bus, and Nathaniel had followed her in defiance. They could have died if they had decided to drive to school. Nathaniel leaned into his lap, panting into his jeans. Sarah continued giving me optimistic looks, as if I'd know what to do. My little sister, who was 2 years younger than me, was already gazing at me as if I were an adult. Their bus had flipped over, spilling searing blood onto the road, smashed glass, and headless people littering the path. There were kids wandering around, befuddled, coated with what remained of the bus driver, while others roamed around crying out for their parents. Nathaniel and Sarah appeared to be the only ones consciously awake. We hugged, but I couldn't feel my siblings wrapping their arms around me. I didn't know how to tell them that our mother was all over me. They could tell by their emotions, Nathaniel embracing Sarah in a hug and my sister sobbing onto his chest. Our village had been normal like any other, and everything had vanished in the blink of an eye. Parents, we were completely buried with them. Teachers, there was mayhem as they pushed through the school entrance. Traumatized 14-year-olds were sobbing, dripping in scarlet, while older students took advantage of the opportunity to go crazy, wrecking classrooms and raiding vending machines. Everyone was involved. That day, 99.9% of our town's population exploded, but it was my mother's blood that was still staining my face, embedded in my body. No matter what I tried, I couldn't get her off of me. Within a few hours, outside help arrived. But I wouldn't call it assistance. According to the outside world, we were a town experiencing an extraordinary event. That means we were quarantined and cut off from the outside world. We were told not to worry after being briefed in the school auditorium, and that aid was on its way. Spoiler alert, they were terrified of us and what they saw to be a contagion. Thus, so-called assistance did not exist. Babies were left without mothers, preschoolers were left without parental figures, and a whole school of teenagers were left to fend for themselves. You'd think a group of youngsters would know what to do in the event of a town-wide disaster, wouldn't you? Especially because we had been abandoned by the rest of the world. We went mad in the first few weeks. Insane, Lord of the Flies. You became a leader if you were outspoken. As a result, the popular students began to seize charge, using kids with no family and nothing to lose and enlisting them into gangs. That, thankfully, came to an end when rescue arrived. 1 month into the town-wide lockdown, several drones were dropped into our quarantine zone. They brought boxes full of medical supplies, food, and electronics, despite the fact that they turned off the internet 2 months later due to a security breach. Wendy Carmichael wrote a now-deleted Reddit post titled, "We are TRAPED, the story of my town under quarantine." Wendy rapidly became an outcast once we were forced to surrender all of our technological devices. There were also guidelines on how to form a community in unusual circumstances. We were instructed to choose a leader, a spokesperson who would set the rules. Gracie Lockhart took on that role. She was the only candidate who wanted to run, and I believe everyone was afraid of her because her now-deceased father was the mayor. Still, children desired someone to look up to, someone to teach them what to do and provide them with a feeling of purpose. Rules were imposed, and everyone over the age of 13 was assigned a job, whether it was as a cook at the university where meals were provided or as a childminder in the press school. I worked as a delivery girl for the first month. When the electronics were still functional, the youngsters spent their pent-up rage and trauma on buying. So I'd get up at 5 a.m. every day, bike to the man-made metal barrier separating our town from the rest of the world, and pick up the rising mountain of Amazon packages thrown on our side. I had a good time working as a delivery girl. It served as a distraction from my grief over Mom's passing. Except for at night, I rarely saw my brother and sister. We'd taken up home in a strange house we'd discovered. Sarah enjoyed the pool, but we chose it because it was remote from our parents. Sarah's job was in the kindergarten, which she detested. Nathaniel was a reluctant member of the research committee. Not exactly a useful work, but Gracie and her carefully chosen counsel, who were actually her pals, ordered my brother and several others to explore the town for answers. Nathaniel claimed it was only a pretext for the popular kids to relax. We already had a scientific explanation, provided by the CDC itself. It was a virus that behaved like spontaneous human combustion and appeared to be ignoring children. Gracie's gang was obsessed with this massive conspiracy, which ranged from aliens to a lab leak at the local university, where they were convinced biological weapons were being manufactured. Nathaniel had asked for a different position several times, but word on the street was that one of the girls in the research committee had a crush on my brother. She had a certain degree of influence because she was so close to Gracie and the newly formed town council, and she could misuse it however she pleased. And she sure abused it. As it became clear that the outside world had abandoned us, and our society began to run out of the provisions given for us, the council began to abuse the amount of power they possessed. Yes, blame it on unresolved trauma or PTSD. But I'd go so far as to claim these children were sociopaths. They were known as the Dark Days, because our world began to fall apart in a couple of weeks. It all started with a notification from outside informing us that our food would be delayed. As a result, we went hungry. The children in power became bored. Children refused to labor without nourishment. Normalcy had collapsed and burnt, and humanity had bled away into something else. Those in positions of authority were no longer silently picking out the good-looking males and girls for their own personal enjoyment. They were just ordering our police force, a small handful of volunteers, to remove people from their homes and bring them before the council. Speaking of the council, they stopped worrying about cleanliness and gave statements while half asleep in their pajamas. Instead of addressing important issues such as the diaper scarcity and the discovery of an 11-year-old child munching on a raw chicken leg, Gracie, who I knew was hoarding food, argued that she was doing everything she could to maintain contact with the outside world, when, in truth, she was making increasingly bizarre regulations that weren't even rules. Some of them were just announcements, as if they were intended for the thrill of tightening her grip on our community. Please bring all of your chocolate to the council meeting. Guys with bad haircuts, I'm looking at you, Oliver Bentley, are no longer permitted in the cafeteria. Cut your hair and dress well, or starve. Any adorable dogs must be surrendered. You can earn one of the last cans of soup if you're physically appealing. Only gorgeous men and women. You will be turned away if you appear to be a hobbit. So, normalcy began to disintegrate. We attempted to uphold it, but when the council began exploiting older children as toys and playthings, our small society came apart. Nathaniel was picked to serve on the council in what began as a silly proclamation and quickly became a norm. Those picked to be the council's right hands must not resist, or their loved ones will suffer. Under a schizophrenic government, we were famished, delirious, and insane. Gracie even ordered the construction of a medieval-style wooden structure outside the town hall, where strangers would be imprisoned. She initially requested that fruit be tossed at them, but we didn't have any. And if we did, I doubt we'd be as insane as we were. The outside world intervened before our commander could go full Lord of the Flies. Thank you, God. Gracie's leadership and counsel were removed, and all of her policies were outright forbidden. Nathaniel and the other prisoners were let free. Sarah and I dragged him from a seemingly innocuous hotel room. We discovered him on the floor, cross-legged, playing Switch games. There was a lot of PG-13 non-consensual groping, according to Nathaniel. He laughed it off, but there was a hollowness in his eyes that bothered me. His grin was far too broad. Sarah pointed out blood on the bedsheets, but I ignored it, dizzily nodding when Nathaniel insisted he was all right. The culprit, who had locked my brother and 5 other senior girls and males in her hotel room that had been transformed into a sex dungeon, was nowhere to be found. Most likely in humiliation. I termed it sexual assault, and thankfully, more children spoke up. Gracie was arrested in a roundabout way. That is, as soon as the quarantine period was complete, she and her small company would be in tremendous trouble. According on what I've heard, the charges are harsh: forced incarceration and non-consensual sex. They were placed under house arrest for the time being. Fortunately, a new council was formed from children with true intelligence and a desire to govern. In his first position as replacement mayor, Liam Cartwright insisted that the military send us enough food and supplies to last us a month. The outer world reluctantly agreed, and we returned to normalcy. Tally Edwards, the female who sexually abused my brother, went missing, and this became our first actual case. Liam formed a police unit of 10 able-bodied children to investigate the girl's disappearance. I was rehired as a delivery girl. When our internet went down, I turned into a type of food delivery business instead. But I enjoyed it. There was something cathartic about waiting for our daily cargo and seeing the outside world go on, while we had ground to a halt. A year is gone, without parents, adults, or a sense of normalcy. But we managed to make it work. We were a group of 16 and 17-year-olds struggling to stay afloat. Normal. But like the rest of the world, mortality existed in our improvised community. There are 5 children, mostly as a result of neglect. Taryn James and her friends discovered a dead infant inside a car collision. On a dare, a 15-year-old girl jumped out of a tree and landed headfirst. Despite having the necessary medical resources, 3 toddlers developed fatal fevers. We may have had medicine, but the hospital workers had no idea what they were doing. How could they? When the 15-year-old was brought in, half of her head caved in. The eldest was 17, and he rushed away, vomited into his fist. Only food was provided by the outside world. We were on our own for the rest of the time. The jerks didn't even send medics. It was a danger they couldn't take, in their words. Little children were dying, but they couldn't save them because of a phantom contagion that hadn't claimed any more lives. Children were not just dying, but also disappearing. The number of those who had gone missing had doubled. 2 kids had vanished, both members of Gracie's original council, and Gracie herself had built her own tiny cult. She was certain that God had abducted her friends and that they had just followed our parents to heaven. The day of judgment was novel. When I biked past the school the week before, Gracie was yelling about aliens and lights in the sky, and a worrying number of her followers sat in a circle around her. She was now persuaded that her pals had been abducted. Cliques have formed around town. which I noticed when riding my bike. It is impossible to be cut off from the outside world without establishing a cult-like group. But, well, we all had our own ways of dealing with losses we couldn't even comprehend and worries that drowned us. I had my own clique, my delivery buddies. We weren't technically a cult, but we spoke crap and wore lime green uniforms and caps. When I started my night shift, the sun was setting as I sat on the barrier, my legs dangling. The sky was a smear of orange and crimson, and the dying sunlight illuminating the clouds hypnotized me. I wasn't supposed to be sitting on the fence. I was done if I fell off. But it was interesting to see what was going on outside. I could see a perfectly operational McDonald's in the distance if I tilted my head at precisely the right angle, paradoxically drenched in a beautiful glow. The curving road below me was taped off with yellow tape, with obstacles in place. Nathaniel had been on my thoughts. His new job was taking up all of his time, but he still didn't come home when he was free. I advised him to make a Zoom appointment with a therapist. Every week, the outside world offered them in the library, which had limited internet connection. But he insisted on being good. On the surface, he appeared to be. Nate would be the irritating elder brother he had always been on weekends, battling over the shower and hiding breakfast from Sarah and me. Even when he was laughing, his face did not match his eyes. I wanted to speak with him about what occurred with Tally. Perhaps he believed it was his fault she was missing. Sarah had encouraged me to take a break for a bit, despite the fact that this had been going on for months. It seemed as if something inside of him was murdering him, eating away at him. And I knew it had something to do with what transpired inside that hotel suite. Testing, testing. A familiar drawl crackled over my pocket-talkie, breaking through my thoughts. Nathaniel was fine, I reasoned. I was simply overreacting. My colleague's voice broke the tranquil silence and provided a nice distraction. The British accent was the cherry on top. "Do they have ramen?" I repeat. "We are in short supply of ramen," he said with a sigh. "Especially the carbonara-style ones from the TikTok store," he moaned, his voice instantly brightening my mood. Ah, yes, TikTok. I miss my daily supply of brain-rotting dopamine. Do you remember those pool-filling videos? They were what made me realize I had undiagnosed ADHD. Jude Cassidy was an odd companion. I barely knew him before the quarantine. And now I knew his deepest, darkest secrets, which he confided in me during our night shift while we waited for our weekly delivery. Jude went around the other side of town, while I went via the main gate. We spent much of our time talking on the phone, or, in his case, telling me about his entire life. Nothing beats staying up till the wee hours of the morning, seeing the first rays of light appear in the sky, and listening to him half-deliriously repeat the whole first season of Breaking Bad from memory. Even with the voices, yes. I once missed a delivery because I was laughing so hard at his Jess Pinkman impersonation that I almost passed out. I clicked the button on my walkie-talkie, swinging my legs in midair. "You do know they're MREs, right? I don't think we have a choice. We'll be lucky to get rice and chicken." I thought for a moment. "Also, you don't seem like the type of guy who used to go on TikTok." He didn't. Jude spent the majority of his time at the school library prior to the disaster. He was well known for his side business of selling candy to senior citizens. He began as a British exchange student that no one could understand, but he swiftly ascended through the social ranks thanks to his accent. I only knew him from English class, when our teacher asked him what the capital of Australia was, and Jude replied, half asleep, "Ha. New Zealand." He was officially New Zealand to me until my second day on the job, when he formally introduced himself, handing me coffee and pouring it all over himself. Jude laughed. I appreciated his presence, even if all it was his voice. I just said I watched pool-filling videos, like in a total trance. He laughed, but his laughter became choppy. I could see he was having a eureka moment. He had a number of them, and they were all tied to what occurred to the adults in town. Asterisk what? If it's something like gods. Jude had proclaimed into the whipping wind one morning, the two of us cycling to work. When I twisted around to shoot him a pointed look, he shrugged, cycling harder, reddish dark hair flying in a blur around him. It's probable. What if Zeus is enraged? He's chastising us. Aliens? He'd said as we lifted things onto the loading dock. I smacked him in the face with a bundle in my hands. What if it's microchips in our brains? Jude said over a mashed potato over lunch, the two of us relaxing on the school roof. His second aha moment of the day. He laughed when I shoved him. I found it difficult to dislike this guy because of his endearing smile. I swear he made up these what-ifs just to irritate me. His theories extended all the way to our community being somehow connected to the Simpson movie. This time, however, I detected a seriousness in his tone. What if that is what saved us? While watching a bird sweep across the sky, I contemplated his question. You think TikTok saved us from combusting? No, he exclaimed. Well, yes, stay with me here. But adults don't use it much, right? Jude exhaled deeply. I could tell he'd already gone off on another tangent. Wait, I can see a group of kids in the town across from us eating Five Guys. My mouth is watering, he said with a groan. This is torture. I can see the fried onions. I can see the animal-style fries and sauce. How excellent was his vision. Do you have binoculars? I couldn't stop myself from laughing. No. Yes. Maybe. I'm just borrowing them. Jude, I shuffled uneasily. My butt had dozed off. Are you sitting on the barrier? He didn't say anything for a long time. That depends. Is a certain Liam Cartwright with you? I spluttered, my finger on the button. You think our 17-year-old mayor is checking up on the delivery kids? Poor Liam is probably asleep. Oh God, yeah, he said, making a frown. Our boy is starting to look like a divorced father of 3. Jude cleared his throat, and the feedback passed straight through me. I am sitting on the barrier, by the way. I can see Orion from here. I used to look at constellations with my mom. She had one of those cool ancient telescopes. My stomach was sickly twisted. I cocked my head back and looked for the star, but I wasn't sure where I was looking. So you're looking through the tiny hole in the barrier. He chuckled as he said, Curse my 2020's vision. I wanted to see what normal life was like, and I get hit in the face with burgers. I want Five Guys so bad. I would kill for one. I could hear him turn the dial on the walkie-talkie. Did you know some people are willing to kill for a takeout? There was a pause, and I could hear his shuffling crackle into interference. I wasn't even required to respond. Jude didn't stop talking. Don't you think this is kinda cool? Apart from the whole, end of the world, dystopian, only our town thing. I could see my breath dancing in front of me, so I zipped up my jacket and exclaimed, freezing our asses off waiting for mediocre meals. No. Like what we're doing. I feel like I'm keeping watch for the undead while my friends, the last survivors of humanity, sleep. Jude took a deep breath. Instead, I'm a glorified Uber Eats delivery guy for a community of kids. You enjoy it though. I yawned, rubbing my hands together. My bones were already chilling from the early November frost. He replied with a hum. It's 8. Jude sighed, leaving both of us in solitude. How did you get on the barrier, Raya? His question caught me off guard, sending a shudder down my spine. What? Well, I have Ben to help me climb up. Even if he sleeps the entire shift, his bulky legs compensate. But you? You're alone, so how exactly are you getting up there? He paused, and the shriek of feedback sent me jolting, and I immediately lost concentration. Jude laughed, and I couldn't stop myself from turning back and examining the deserted road behind me. There was no evidence of life. For the first time in a long time, my radio crackled, and I jumped. Wait. Jude's tone had soured noticeably. So, you're telling me you managed to scale a barrier this high with zero help? My tongue became entangled for a little minute. I stand on crates, I replied. Obviously. Jude made a humming sound. Oh, you stack 'em up. The imaginary crates you're making up. I tightened my grasp on my walkie-talkie, my finger on the off button. Why do you care? Oh, I don't, Jude said quietly. I'm just curious how you learned how to climb this high. The silence that followed twisted my stomach. I could hear Jude's breathing, and if I paid close attention, late-night traffic passing through town over the barrier. Jude's laugh astonished me. I'm just messing with ya, Rhea. The night shift goes to my head, you know. I gotta find new ways of bantering why ya. Sure, I answered, but my chest tightened. Ooh, shit. I think my delivery is here. I gotta go before they spot me on the barrier, he said with a sigh. Ah, over and out, or whatever you're supposed to say. A new shiver went down my spine as I turned off the talkie and cut off his farewell. My delivery arrived not long after. 5,000 MREs. I couldn't stop myself from devouring the first one. But Jude's remarks lingered in my head, making me uneasy. I became desperate as a result of my paranoia. Being desperate reminded me of how hungry I was. When the sour-faced man helping me unload the container cleared his throat, I was cramming handfuls of cold rice and chicken into my mouth. You're supposed to microwave it, sweetheart. I chose to ignore him. Is this it? I asked, my mouth full of mush. Mush had never tasted so delicious. No snacks. He threw me a crumbled Milky Way while keeping his distance. There's a snack. Knock yourself out. I arrived home with 3 MREs ready to eat after spending the entire night delivering them to locked doors that were ordinarily open and welcoming. I had chosen the best for my family. Nathaniel gets chili, Sarah gets chicken and noodles, and I get fried rice. When I opened the door, I was welcomed by quiet snores, my younger sister sleeping on the couch, and Nathaniel curled up on the floor in a blanket. I took my food from the package, microwaved it, and then collapsed on the floor next to my brother. I was exhausted. I was so exhausted that I couldn't even move my legs. What else did Jude say? Rhea, how did you go onto the barrier? The microwave did not wake me up. It smelled like burning plastic and burnt food. Get up, said a familiar voice, jolting me out of my reverie. When I didn't move, I was kicked in the stomach and something was dropped on my head. I sat up, a scream in my mouth, the charred remains of my meal dripping down my cheeks. 2 pairs of feet stood over me. And when I looked up, it was Gracie Lockhart. She was a lunatic, but she made sense. But not our mayor, Liam, who wore a solemn countenance. Get up. I was kicked in the head this time. My eyesight blurred as my brain bounced about inside my skull. I was unsteady on my feet. The color orange was all around me. I believed it was the microwave catching fire, but then I noticed the blurred orange movement. Torches were held by Gracie, Liam, and 2 other guys. The brightness was nearly hypnotic. I was riveted until I broke out of it. Nathaniel stood in front of me, arms tied behind his back. Sarah, squeaking and muffling, is caught between the grasps of 2 girls. I discovered my voice. What's going on? My arms were yanked violently behind my back. When I turned around, I was face to face with my best friend. Jude hid behind his curls in a hooded sweater. He didn't make eye contact with me as he pushed me and the others towards the door. Gracie spat in my face before dragging me out of our house and forcing me to my knees. I tried to raise my head, but Gracie stamped on my back, and I shrieked. Nathaniel and Sarah were thrown next to me, and I stared at my brother's reflection in the eyes. Following the orange glow that lit up the darkness, a swarm of shouting children stood in front of us, all clutching torches that were glowing brightly. We found them, Gracie exclaimed, only for them to rejoice, a lunatic hive mind thirsty for our blood. We have FOU'd the evil who did this to our parents, who trapped us. She'd had to be joking, right? Nathaniel's eyes widened as he shook his head. What? You're fucking serious. Gracie knelt in front of us, holding her phone. Her proof was a screenshot of a tweet sent the same day the grown-ups blew up. The Sinclairs are witches. It said, submitted from an account with 0 followers, 0 likes, and a default profile photo. Panic began to seep into my stomach. Isolation and malnutrition were already causing mental breakdowns in the town. Could they truly believe we'd begun it? "Jude," I said, a shrill squeak I didn't trust. "Blood for blood," shrieked Gracie. I caught his sight in the crowd and forced me to my feet by my hair. "Jude, I'm not a fucking witch. You murdered my mother," he murmured in hushed tones, a demented laugh creeping from his lips. "She was all over me, and I couldn't breathe. Her blood was stuck to me. She was everywhere, Raya." "You know me," I managed to say. "Jude, you know this is bullshit." He didn't react, his face hardening. I wanted I could have seen a flash of power in his eyes. But it was all his fault. "Burn the witch," he snarled, his lip twitching, before his hiss evolved into a shout, piercing past the cries of the mob. "Fucking burn them. Burn them," screamed the multitude. When we were taken across town, poor food and filthy diapers were thrust in our faces, I quit struggling. I knew where we were going, and my entire body had gone numb. Nathaniel remained immobile and silent, his dark eyes scouring the crowd for his companions. Sarah cried and sobbed, pleading with a group of teens who had already selected her fate. Jude was the one who dragged me to our founder tree, binding me to my brothers. Jude took a step back, clutching his torch for dear life. They surrounded us with a ring of flaming flames and enthusiastic expressions. Gracie took a step forward, Liam by her side. I realized in her warped little mind that murdering us would bring the adults back, and she had spread the word like a virus, polluting the minds of the people in town. "Rhea Sinclair," she remarked as she stepped in front of me. Then there were the others. Nathaniel Sinclair. She was gentle with Tara, lifting her head with the point of her fingernail. "And Sarah Sinclair, we find you to be guilty of witchcraft," she stated. "Your sentence is burning in the pits of hell where you belong." I didn't take her seriously, even with a torch in her hand, until she took a knife from her pocket. When the blade was dragged across my crying sister's throat, I moved my sight to the sky. I stared to the moon peeping through the clouds instead of staring at her cries gurgled as deep, dark blood marred the earth. I was not present when my sister died. I just noticed her hunching over, her dark brown curls falling in front of her face. The reaction of the crowd was eerie, with shouts for my sister's head to be severed and triumphant waves in the air. My eyes welled up with tears as I kept my gaze fixed on the sky. "Nate," I managed to get away. I wanted to yell, "She's dead. Our sister is no longer with us." "Nate," I exclaimed. He didn't answer even when Gracie knelt in front of him and drew the knife blade down his cheek, forcing him to stare at her with the tip of her nail. He sobbed, "You're a fucking murderer," only to have her spit in his face. Nathaniel remained immobile, battling his shackles. "Witch," Gracie Lockhart snarled as she pushed the knife deeper into his skin. "You're a filthy witch, Nathaniel Sinclair." I'm not sure what made the difference. Was it Gracie who paraded my sister's body before him, or Gracie who spit in his face? I could already feel it, chilly prickles crawling down my naked arms and playing with my hair strands. As I twisted my head, Nathaniel smiled. The contortion in his cheekbones, the amusement fading to agony, the strange darkness spider webbing over his pupils were all visible to me. Enchantment with velvet. He had that odor. I knew the asshole would use it. For a long time, velvet magic, also known as possession magic, was forbidden. Witches are to people what medications are to animals, addictive, because it is pulled from evil energy that humans naturally emit. It is well known to take over the mind and soul of the witch who owns it. If my brother was employing velvet magic, he was doing so with intent. I was too, but I was inexperienced. That is precisely what my mother said that morning. I wouldn't be able to practice possession magic until I was 18 years old. I have a confession to make. What I wrote at the beginning was not totally correct. Yes, I yelled at my mother. How did I know fuck off and die would truly work? And how would I know it would wipe out half the fucking town? Nathaniel was the witch in our family. In theory, he could do whatever he pleased. And unlike me, he was powerful. That meant, why was he employing velvet magic to begin with? For a year, I had been privately tearing myself apart over my magic being the root of our town's misery. Was I mistaken? Was it, in fact, Nathaniel? Did he murder the adults? When Gracie's brains began to seep out of her ears, I should have been alarmed. Except she had slain my sister and tied me to a tree. I was the leader of a government that assaulted my brother. Squeaking, the girl slammed her hand over her lips, smearing scarlet streaming down her cheeks. "Nate," I called out, but I don't think he noticed. Nathaniel just discovered our little sister's body. I gasped as Gracie's skull ripped apart with a single flick of his finger behind his back, her happy grin twisting into dread. She didn't even get to feel it, which was a mercy I knew she didn't deserve. The crowd fell silent when a portion of the girl's skull landed on the ground, lips still split into a horrific skeleton grin. Before screams, Gracie's body landed on the ground and caught fire, flames flickering across her flesh. Nathaniel quietly broke apart his bindings and sent the throng flying several feet with a single jerk of his wrist, his eyes filled with black. When he let go of his hands, his gaze fell on mine, and he opened his mouth. But it was overpowered by mechanical screeching from above. Looking above, I noticed a helicopter circling, and I remembered my mother's comments. "Do you hear me? Do not bring attention to yourself." When another chopper appeared, her words echoed in my head. "Raya, there are wicked individuals. Bad witches are on the lookout for us. They'll kill us if they find us. Our entire coven is present in this town. They're going to burn it down." Nathaniel wrapped his arms around me, ignoring the presence in the sky. Something was wrong with the darkness in his eyes and the spider web across his face, enchantment with velvet. It enveloped him, drowning out the blackness. 1,500, he said into my shoulder before drawing away, his breaths thick. 1,500, he said, his voice contorting into a laugh that wasn't my brother's. Mom taught us the art of possession magic. It transforms witches by instilling darkness in their minds. Blood for blood. I didn't have time to interrogate him. Rough hands were tearing my restraints away. "Come on," screamed a voice. But I was looking at my brother as he scooped Sarah's body into his arms. "Are you stupid? Do you really want to hang around and let yourself be caught?" I was dizzy, being carried by a shadow I fought. But I was too frail, my magic slipping right off him. "They're rounding up witches," the shadow said in a voice I recognized. "Jude." I spun around and kicked him in the face, which he easily avoided by seizing my shoulders. He dragged me back, pulling me into a clearing while the mob screamed once more. Nathaniel had murdered at least 10 children. When I ventured a glance, my brother was dragging my sister away, unaffected by the cries from above telling him to stay there. When purple sparks landed on the ground like fireworks, I concluded the shooters were not human. "Witches." Jude's lips pressed against my ear. "Your idiot brother just gave them a reason to start hunting us down, and the Sinclairs are at the top of the list. So if I were you," he said with a grin on his face, "I would start running." The relentless Arizona sun scorched the sands, announcing the start of another sweltering day. Our team, a small group of scientists from several disciplines, had come together with a single purpose in mind: to peel back the layers of the desert's ecological mysteries. The university had backed us up, attracted by the potential of uncovering climate secrets hidden inside the dry terrain. My heart rate increased as I stepped off the paved walkway, my boots sliding slightly into the warm, fine sand. Our guide, Thomas, was a desert man, a walking chronicle of its harsh beauty and hidden dangers. He was a last-minute addition, a tribute to local expertise, and a request from our skeptical project manager, who was concerned about the untamed sprawl of this particular valley. "It's not on any map for a reason," he'd said, eyeing the assembled crowd, his message clear. Strangers were not welcome here lightly. Thomas greeted us with solemn nods rather than handshakes, his deep-set eyes gleaming with knowledge that told of centuries rooted in these areas. As we carry our luggage, preparing to walk into the valley that lay like a slumbering beast beneath the rising sun, he narrated traditions whispered by his forebears, stories of shifting sands devouring dreams, spirits roaming beneath the starry sky, their desires as cryptic as the petroglyphs etched in the secret canyons. "The spirits here, they're alive," Thomas declared, his voice filled with unshakable trust. He spoke of his people's reverence for the earth, a pledge they kept by avoiding the valley. "My people do not enter this valley. It is not a living space." His dark and inscrutable eyes locked into each of ours, ensuring his message was felt deep within our bones. He agreed to accompany us for a day, to the boundary of the wild area, and then to leave us to our own devices. "7 days," he answered. "I will come back for you then." His parting words were cryptic, warning us that our presence constituted a ripple in the still waters of this ancient location, an infringement that those watching from the invisible boundaries might not forgive. We watched as he walked away, his figure receding against the vast expanse of the desert. We felt a great sensation of isolation as he vanished over a distant dune, a strong knowledge that we were now alone in an area that did not belong to us, a land that Thomas and his people cherished, feared, and eventually left alone. The first several nights were uneventful. The desert appeared unfazed by our presence. We built our sophisticated campground with all the arrogance of modernity, trusting technology to keep us safe from the primeval powers alluded to by Thomas. Solar panels shined beside high-tech tents, while satellite phones kept us in touch with the outside world. It was a 21st century bubble perched incongruously on a terrain that time seemed to have forgotten. The heat was oppressive during the day, pressing down on us like a physical weight, but it was the nights that were truly terrible. The desert chill was a dramatic contrast to the day's heat, and it hinted at things unseen that moved with the shadows. Our technology began to fail, and our GPS signals became erratic, as if the planet itself was resisting our efforts to map its secrets. We explained it away as magnetic minerals in the rocks or some other scientific explanation. When our tools began to go missing, expensive, cutting-edge instruments that we had meticulously secured, concern spread among us. Our tent seams had been ripped open by an unknown sword, and our painstakingly collected samples had been scattered and ruined. It felt personal, as if the desert was rejecting our presence and contradicting our calculations and facts. Our campfire laughter, which had formerly been full of scientific assurance, began to vanish. We made fun of coyotes who liked high-tech gadgets, but our smiles were tight, and we kept looking over our shoulders into the darkness. The desert seemed to be listening, its silence heavy with expectation rather than emptiness. On the 4th night, the cry destroyed our scientific detachment, a spine-chilling sound that appeared to be both human and something much ancient. We found Jim just outside the ring of light cast by our campfire, his body still warm, his face frozen in terror, as if he had witnessed something beyond comprehension, something that called into question the very principles of nature we were there to examine. We formed a tight circle around Jim's body, our modern, rational minds struggling to make sense of his death. There was no blood, no animal bite marks, and no sand tracks. It was as if his life had been snatched from him, leaving behind a shell that had been stunned by whatever it had met. The satellite phone was useless, delivering only a static-filled connection to the outside world, which may have been 1,000,000 miles away. We were completely alone, with a dead colleague and the uneasy feeling that whatever had taken Jim would not leave us alone. Panic fell over our camp like a dense cloud, its grip cold and unrelenting. I remember lying awake in my tent, waiting for any noise that would suggest the presence of something. Our scientist, Ellie, had taken it upon herself to document the local flora in the hopes of learning more about the land's resilience. After Jim's inexplicable death, her enthusiasm had diminished, and she had grown preoccupied with the valley's predatory nature. The day after we found Jim, Ellie approached me, her eyes wide with dread and fascination. "The desert is alive," she quietly stated, echoing Thomas. She recounted feeling watched by the barren hills, and how the whispering breezes seemed to carry taunting and warning words. I attempted to brush it off as grief showing as madness, but her next words chilled me to the bone. "I hear them at night," she shuddered, referring to the spirits Thomas had warned us about. "They're more than merely stories." That day and the next, she was in a frenzy, collecting samples with a devotion that seemed to be about more than scientific discovery. She seemed to be hunting for evidence of something invisible, something she felt was directing our demise. Her kidnapping came after a night of whispering that seemed to slither in from the desert's dark recesses. I lay in my tent, sleep an unattainable desire, listening to sounds beyond comprehension. Soft thuds that sounded like footsteps, and a low, constant mumbling that was neither human nor animal. By daybreak, Ellie's tent was empty, her things thrown about, documents scattered as if caught in a fierce breeze that had touched nothing else in the vicinity. The rest of us collected in a herd mentality. Our geophysicist, Sarah, began ranting about ancient curses and the folly of our mission. The information we had painstakingly obtained was now lost, inconsequential in the face of the unseen hunter that stalked us. Every gust of wind, every sand movement felt like a harbinger of the next awful cry that would herald the death of another of us. Our scientific resolve had crumbled, and we were replaced by a primal desire to survive. But in this wide wasteland, where could we go? The wasteland that was once our research hideaway now loomed over us like a large open jail. We were trapped in a situation with an unpredictable plot, each of us potentially the next character to be abruptly and unexpectedly removed. With each sunset that spilled across the sands, a palpable horror crept further into my bones. We'd become into specters in our own tent, leaping at the slightest movement or breeze. The desert had gone from being a research site to a dangerous location, and the line between science and survival had become permanently muddled. Sarah had developed an obsession with the horizon, as if the undulating waves could reveal our fate. She mentioned the somber atmosphere that each rock seemed to cast. "We are not welcome here," she'd mutter under her breath, trying to justify the irrational. The days passed with the ferocity of a curse. Our conversations were increasingly irregular, born of necessity rather than friendship. We rationed our water carefully, not knowing when Thomas would or could return. The desert had deprived us of our arrogance, of our belief that science and technology could overcome any barrier. Our equipment lay around, useless and abandoned, a testament to our folly. The solar panels, which were once our lifeline, now did little more than reflect the sun's scorching rays. The satellite phone was deafeningly silent, offering no solace, connection, or assistance. We were castaways on a sand sea, dragged further away from the world we knew by the desert's unrelenting tide. Every night, I found myself unable to sleep because I was too tired to keep watch. Sarah disappeared during one of these foggy vigils. In the early morning light, I discovered her tent blown open and her belongings in disarray, as if she had been dragged from it by some unseen force. I stood on the borders of her emptiness, the wind whispering through the fabric of her tent, and I thought I heard her voice, a soft appeal borne away with the dust. What remained of our gang clung to rationality in the vain hope that Thomas would truly return. I didn't dare to express my anxiety that he was hiding something, that his 7-day commitment was a countdown to some inescapable end that he couldn't prevent. The desert had become our purgatory, a place of waiting and repentance for sins we had committed but were unconscious of. It was clear to me now that we were fighting not only the elements, but also the desert's old, awakening core. I write these phrases alone, my hand trembling, the ink standing out against the light canvas of my journal. I've become the sole survivor of our group's inexplicable breakdown. Time has lost its meaning, and the days have become a never-ending cycle of fear and anguish. I'm not sure how long it's been. The light comes and goes with the same callous violence, and my colleagues' lingering shadows spread out in my imagination, warped and extended by horror. I periodically catch sight of movement on the fringes of my vision. Figures on the dunes, silhouetted against the harsh sky, stare at me. I raise my gaze to meet theirs, expecting to get a glimmer of humanity, a spark of understanding, but they're too far away, obscured by the heat's shimmer. When I blink, they evaporate, my rational mind dismissing their appearance as an illusion, a trick of loneliness and fear. However, as time passes, these images become more common. I can see them more clearly now, apparitions that appear to move with the heat, figures that are both present and absent. They look at me with a visceral intensity, their immobility more terrifying than any predatory beast's charge. I suppose I see them now and then, the silhouettes of my fallen colleagues, or maybe the ancient spirits Thomas mentioned, have come to claim me as well. My intellectual reasoning has disintegrated, leaving only the raw core of human instinct. The desert is alive with the souls of those who have died and become one with its dust and nothingness, so I am not completely alone. Not for the sake of research, but as a legacy in case my notebook outlives my physical life, I put down my experiences and observations. The irony is not lost on me. After devoting my life to the pursuit of knowledge, I now hold out hope that ignorance could have been pleasurable. The haunting has become my reality, an endless chase by forces I can't fully see, understand, or escape. The heat scorches and the cold stings, but it's the unseen eyes on me that have sapped the last of my resolve. Now I'm waiting for the desert to decide my fate, not for rescue or Thomas, as it has for so many others before me.